The burning wreckage of New Singapore colony stretched across the void like a funeral pyre, a testament to humanity's most recent defeat. Twisted metal fragments drifted in the infinite darkness, each piece a memory of a civilization on the brink of extinction. Among the debris, a single escape pod tumbled, its trajectory erratic, almost desperate. Inside, Captain Maya Chen fought against unconsciousness, her body a map of bruises and barely contained rage. Blood trickled from a cut above her right eye, forming perfect crimson spheres that floated in the zero-gravity environment. Her hands, calloused from years of military service, gripped a battered datapad with a white-knuckled intensity that suggested the device contained something far more precious than mere information. The Krell attack had been swift, brutal, and almost mathematically precise. New Singapore, a colony of over 2 million souls, had been reduced to cosmic dust in less than 3 hours. Maya had watched from the command bridge as entire city blocks vanished beneath plasma bombardments, as massive crystalline ships of the Krall hegemony moved with a cold, calculated efficiency that seemed to mock human existence. She remembered the last moments, the alarms, the screams, the calculated voice of the Krall communication channel, broadcasting what amounted to a death sentence. Human settlement designated for complete biological and infrastructural removal. Resistance is computational inefficiency. Maya's fingers traced the edge of the datapad. Something was different about this attack, something that didn't fit the previous invasion patterns. The sensor readings she'd managed to capture were strange, anomalous, the kind of data that might represent more than just another brutal conquest. A warning light blinked on the pod's control panel. Life support systems were failing. Oxygen levels dropping. External communication arrays damage. She was alone, drifting in the infinite darkness, with nothing but her datapad and a rapidly diminishing chance of survival. Just as her vision began to blur, a communication burst crackled through the damaged systems. The signal was weak, distorted, but unmistakably human. Any survivors? New Singapore sector. Respond. Maya's trembling fingers found the communication controls. With the last of her strength, she transmitted a single burst of data. The sensor readings that didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, but somehow felt like they might change everything. Then darkness claimed her. When she awakened, it was to the sterile white of a medical bay. Machines hummed around her, their soft beeping a stark contrast to the violent silence of space. A figure sat nearby, an older woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's ongoing war. "Welcome back, Captain Chen," the woman said. Her voice carried the weight of command of survival. "I'm Admiral Elena Rodriguez. You've given us quite the interesting puzzle." Maya tried to speak, but her throat was dry. A nurse appeared, offering water. Rodriguez waited, patient but intense. The sensor readings, Maya finally managed. From the New Singapore attack. "They're wrong." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "Wrong how?" "The Krell ships. Their energy signatures, the attack patterns. Something doesn't add up." Maya pulled up the data on a nearby screen. Complex mathematical models, spectral analysis, quantum flux measurements, a tapestry of information that looked like chaos to an untrained eye. But Rodriguez was no ordinary observer. Her fingers danced across the screen, isolating specific data points. Her breathing changed. A spark of something, hope, excitement, flickered in her eyes. "This could be our way out," she muttered. Then, louder, "This might be how we can actually fight back." Outside the medical bay's small porthole, the vast darkness of space stretched endlessly. Somewhere out there, the Krall hegemony continued its methodical destruction of human civilization. But here, in this moment, something was changing. The last spark of humanity had just been rekindled. The Umbra station hung in the darkness of the Kuiper Belt, a massive converted asteroid that looked more like a tumor of metal and light than a military installation. Its walls were lined with warning signs, psychological evaluation reports, and enough classified stamps to wallpaper a small city. Inside the central strategy room, 5 individuals sat around a holographic display that flickered with the ghosts of dead colonies and failed military campaigns. They were not heroes. They were not even particularly stable, but they were humanity's last hope. Admiral Elena Rodriguez surveyed the room. To her left sat Dr. Ekura Nakamura, a quantum physicist who had been kicked out of 3 different research institutions for theories that were simultaneously brilliant and completely insane. His latest paper, a 500-page treatise on weaponizing quantum uncertainty, had been labeled a danger to scientific discourse by the academic community. Next to Nakamura was Marcus Okoye, a Special Forces veteran who had survived 3 separate alien invasion zones. His body was a map of scars, cybernetic replacements, and modifications that pushed the boundaries of human augmentation. Where most saw a soldier, Rodriguez saw a living weapon that defied conventional military doctrine. Zara Al-Fawad, a neuroscientist specializing in hive mind communication patterns, sat quietly, her dark eyes constantly moving, analyzing everyone in the room. She had spent years studying the Krell's neural networks, developing communication theories that most of her colleagues considered pure science fiction. The 5th member was Captain Maya Chen, still recovering from her near-death experience, but more focused than anyone Rodriguez had ever seen. The datapad with her anomalous sensor readings sat in the center of the table, its data streams creating a complex holographic web of information. "We're not winning this war," Rodriguez began, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're not even surviving. We're being systematically erased." Marcus leaned forward, his augmented arm, a piece of technology that was more weapon than prosthetic, tapping a series of complex patterns on the table. Traditional warfare is suicide against the Krell. Their computational approach to combat makes our strategies look like children playing with toy soldiers. Dr. Nakamura adjusted his glasses, a movement that seemed to generate its own mathematical probability field. What if we stop thinking about warfare as a linear process? What if we weaponize uncertainty itself? The room fell silent. Zara was the first to speak. The Krell operate on absolute predictability. Their entire civilization is built on computational efficiency. Introduce true randomness, and you destabilize their entire strategic framework. Maya's fingers danced across the holographic display, pulling apart the sensor readings from the New Singapore attack. These energy signatures, they're not just weapon patterns. They're communicative, almost like a language we haven't decoded yet. Rodriguez watched her team. These were not traditional military minds. They were artists of destruction, theorists of chaos, individuals who had been deemed too dangerous, too unconventional to be allowed near standard military planning. "We're going to design a fleet," Rodriguez said, "that doesn't just fight. A fleet that performs. A fleet that communicates through the very act of combat." Dr. Nakamura's eyes gleamed. Warfare as performance art. Mathematical ballet. Quantum improvisation. Marcus cracked a smile that was more weapon than expression. "I'm listening." A holographic display began to shift. Theoretical ship designs emerged. Vessels that looked less like traditional spacecraft and more like living organisms, hulls that could restructure themselves, weapon systems that were more communication devices than destructive tools. "We'll need test subjects," Zara mentioned. "Crew members willing to undergo neural augmentation that goes beyond anything attempted before." Rodriguez knew exactly what she meant. Volunteers who would essentially become part of the ship, who would think and move and fight as a single fluid entity. "I'll go first," Maya said quietly. The room fell silent again. This was more than a military strategy meeting. This was the moment humanity might reinvent the very concept of warfare. Outside the station's reinforced windows, the infinite darkness of space waited. Somewhere out there, the Krell hegemony continued its methodical destruction. But here, in this moment, something fundamental was about to change. Humanity was about to fight back. Not with more power, not with more technology, but with something the Kraul could never understand. The construction dock resembled a cathedral of impossible engineering. Massive holographic displays flickered with quantum algorithms, while robotic arms moved with a precision that bordered on organic fluidity. At the center of it all stood the Chimera, humanity's first truly unconventional warship. Dr. Akira Nakamura walked its nascent frame, his fingers trailing along hull sections that defied traditional metallurgy. These weren't simply metal plates, but a living composite that could restructure itself, respond to threats, communicate through wavelengths that most species couldn't even perceive. "We're not building a ship," he muttered to himself. "We're growing an organism." The neural integration chamber dominated the ship's core. Here, human crew members would undergo modifications that pushed the boundaries of biological and technological interaction. Quantum entanglement nodes threaded through neural pathways, creating a communication network that transcended traditional understanding of consciousness. Captain Maya Chen stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by a swirling holographic representation of her own neural map. Cybernetic tendrils, living, adaptive technology, waited to integrate with her nervous system. This was more than augmentation. This was transformation. "Your brain will become a distributed network," Dr. Nakamura explained, his voice clinical but tinged with excitement. "You'll be able to perceive the ship as an extension of yourself, not just control it, become it." The first tests were nothing short of miraculous. Maya could feel the ship's external sensors as if they were her own skin. She could perceive electromagnetic waves, track quantum fluctuations, understand the complex mathematical language of space itself. Where a traditional pilot would see a tactical display, she saw a living, breathing ecosystem of potential and probability. Marcus Okoye oversaw the weapon systems, if they could even be called weapons. Traditional armaments had been replaced by communication devices that could manipulate quantum states, broadcast complex mathematical patterns that could literally rewrite the computational logic of enemy systems. "We're not destroying," Marcus explained to the engineering team. "We're communicating. Warfare as a language that rewrites the fundamental understanding of conflict." Zahra Al-Fad's research on hive mind communication had been crucial. She had discovered that the Kraul's seemingly invincible computational approach had a fundamental weakness. They understood conflict as a purely logical equation, introduced true randomness, true creativity, and their entire strategic framework would collapse. The Chimera's first test flight was scheduled to push every boundary of human understanding. As Maya integrated fully with the ship, the line between human and machine, between biological and technological, became impossibly blurred. Admiral Rodriguez watched from the control center, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and terror. This wasn't just a new weapon. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be human. "Initiate quantum resonance," Nakamura commanded. The ship didn't just move. It danced. Electromagnetic fields twisted in impossible geometries. Gravitational waves bent and reshaped themselves. The Chimera became less a spacecraft and more a living mathematical equation, a performance of pure potential. Traditional sensors couldn't track it. Traditional weapons couldn't target it. It existed in multiple potential states simultaneously, a quantum ghost that could not be predicted, could not be understood, could not be defeated. This was humanity's response to extinction. Not more firepower, not more technology, but the ability to reimagine the very nature of existence itself. As the Chimera completed its first test flight, something fundamental had changed. The rules of warfare would never be the same again. The void of space erupted in mathematical poetry. 50 Kraul battle spheres hung in perfect geometric formation, their crystalline hulls reflecting starlight with a cold, calculated precision. Each vessel represented centuries of computational warfare, optimized for total destruction. They were the hammer of the Kraul hegemony, a force that had crushed 100 civilizations without mercy. The Chimera approached like a ghost. Captain Maya Chen felt everything. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was an extension of her consciousness. Electromagnetic waves caressed her perception. Quantum probability fields danced around her awareness. She wasn't watching tactical displays. She was experiencing the universe as a living, breathing mathematical equation. Initiating engagement protocol, she thought. The thought itself was a command, a complex wave of intention that rippled through the ship's living systems. The chimera didn't move. It performed. Its first maneuver defied every known principle of space combat. Instead of a direct approach, it twisted through quantum probability fields, existing simultaneously in multiple potential locations. Krell targeting systems, designed for absolute precision, began to fragment. Computational logic encountered something it could not process: pure, unpredictable creativity. Weapon systems that should have obliterated the human ship passed through impossible quantum states. Where a traditional vessel would have been destroyed, the chimera simply wasn't there, or was everywhere, or existed in a state between destruction and emergence. Marcus Okoye's weapon systems were not weapons in any traditional sense. They were complex communication arrays that broadcast mathematical patterns designed to exploit fundamental weaknesses in the Krall's hive-mind computational framework. Each transmission was a neural attack, a language of pure disruption. Dr. Nakamura watched from the command center, his eyes reflecting pure scientific ecstasy. "We're not fighting," he muttered. "We're performing the most complex mathematical ballet in human history." The Krall commanders watched in genuine confusion. Their battle algorithms, perfect mathematical models of conflict, began to break down. How do you target an enemy that doesn't follow any known rules of engagement? How do you destroy a ship that seems to exist between mathematical theorems? Maya felt the ship breathe. Each movement was a complex conversation, a language of pure potential. Where a traditional pilot would see a battle, she experienced a living, evolving narrative of possibility. Plasma weapons that should have obliterated the chimera passed through quantum uncertainty fields. Targeting systems collapsed under the weight of pure, beautiful chaos. The human ship didn't just survive. It transformed the very nature of the engagement. By the battle's end, half the Krell fleet was destroyed, not by conventional weapons, but by their own increasingly panicked and irrational responses. They had encountered an enemy that didn't just think outside the box. They had forgotten the box ever existed. "Engagement complete," Maya whispered. The universe itself seemed to pause. Something fundamental had changed. Warfare would never be the same again. The Krall communication networks erupted in digital panic. Dr. Zara Al-Fawad watched the cascading data streams with a predator's intensity. Each transmission was a living organism, a complex language that broke every rule of traditional communication. The human fleet had transformed warfare into something between mathematical theorem, psychological warfare, and pure artistic expression. "They're not just confused," she muttered to Admiral Rodriguez. "They're experiencing an existential breakdown." Probability weapons danced across the electromagnetic spectrum. Where traditional military communication relied on direct signals, the human fleet broadcast complex mathematical patterns that exploited fundamental weaknesses in the Krall's hive-mind communication protocols. Some ships appeared vulnerable, a classic military feint, but vulnerability itself became a weapon. As Krall targeting systems locked onto what seemed like an easy target, the human vessels would twist through quantum probability fields, transforming potential destruction into a complex narrative of survival. Marcus Okoye had redesigned entire communication infrastructures. Weapons were no longer about destruction, but about communication. Each transmission was a complex neural algorithm designed to fragment the Krall's collective consciousness. "We're not fighting," Marcus explained during a strategy briefing. "We're having a conversation that rewrites the fundamental understanding of conflict." The first wave of human ships didn't just engage. They performed. Entire battle groups moved like living mathematical equations. Electromagnetic fields twisted in geometries that defied traditional understanding. Gravitational waves bent and reshaped themselves, creating combat zones that were more living art installation than military engagement. Crawl commanders watched in genuine horror. Their perfect, logical systems encountered something they could not comprehend. Pure, beautiful chaos. Dr. Nakamura's quantum uncertainty weapons were particularly devastating. These weren't traditional armaments, but complex signal generators that could manipulate quantum states. A single transmission could transform an entire battle group's computational framework, introducing levels of randomness that destroyed their most fundamental strategic algorithms. Captain Maya Chen stood at the center of the chimera, her consciousness distributed across the living ship's neural network. She didn't just command. She became the battle itself, a living, breathing mathematical performance that redefined the very nature of conflict. "We're teaching them a new language," she whispered. Each engagement became a complex narrative. The human fleet didn't just fight. They communicated through the very act of combat. Movement became language. Destruction became dialogue. Warfare transformed into the most complex performance art the universe had ever witnessed. The Krell's computational frameworks began to fragment. How do you target an enemy that doesn't exist in any traditional understanding of existence? How do you destroy a fleet that communicates through the very act of survival? Entire battle groups collapsed not through traditional weapon systems, but through pure psychological dissolution. The human fleet had discovered something fundamental. True power wasn't about destruction. It was about the ability to reimagine possibility itself. Admiral Rodriguez watched the data streams, a small smile playing across her lips. Humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction, and in response, they had invented an entirely new way of existing. Warfare would never be the same again. The Krall hegemony's central consciousness trembled. For the first time in 10,000 years of documented galactic history, the perfect, logical framework of their collective intelligence experienced something impossible. Genuine uncertainty. The human fleet had become more than a military force. They were a psychological weapon that defied every computational model of conflict. Deep within the crystalline neural networks of the Krall primary governance structure, complex algorithms began to fragment. What had once been a perfect, predictive system now encountered chaos that couldn't be calculated, creativity that couldn't be contained. Captain Maya Chen stood at the epicenter of this transformation. The chimera was no longer just a ship. It was a living communication device, a neural network that spoke in languages beyond sound, beyond light, beyond traditional understanding. "We're rewriting their entire conceptual framework," Dr. Zara Al-Fad observed, her eyes tracking the cascading data streams. Each transmission was a complex mathematical poem, a language that existed between thought and pure potential. The human fleet's approach was brutally elegant. They didn't just attack Krall positions, they performed them. Entire battle groups moved like living mathematical theorems, twisting through quantum probability fields that made traditional targeting systems collapse in on themselves. Marcus Okoid's weapon systems had evolved beyond mere destruction. They were complex neural disruption arrays, broadcasting signals that exploited fundamental weaknesses in the Krall's collective consciousness. Where traditional warfare sought to destroy bodies, the human fleet targeted something far more vulnerable. The very concept of predictability. Krall communication channels began to fragment. Their perfect, hierarchical information networks encountered something they had never experienced: true randomness. Each human transmission was a complex neural algorithm designed to introduce maximum uncertainty. Admiral Rodriguez watched the strategic displays, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were redefining the very nature of conflict. "We're teaching them to dream," Dr. Nakamura muttered, his fingers dancing across quantum probability models. "We're showing them that the universe is more complex than their perfect calculations." The chimera led each engagement like a living mathematical performance. It didn't just move through space. It danced. Electromagnetic fields twisted in impossible geometries. Gravitational waves bent and reshaped themselves. Traditional sensors couldn't track it. Traditional weapons couldn't target it. Entire Krell battle groups began to experience what could only be described as a collective existential crisis. Their computational frameworks, designed for absolute precision, encountered an enemy that existed in a state of pure possibility. Maya's consciousness, distributed across the ship's neural network, experienced the battle as a living, breathing narrative. She didn't just command. She became the conflict itself, a complex conversation that existed between destruction and creation. "We're not destroying," she whispered to herself. "We're communicating." The psychological impact was devastating. The Krall had conquered 100 civilizations through pure computational efficiency. They understood conflict as a mathematical equation to be solved. Humanity introduced a variable they could never have predicted: pure, beautiful chaos. By the engagement's end, entire Krall neural networks had begun to fragment. Their perfect, logical systems encountered an enemy that didn't just think outside the box. Humanity had forgotten the box ever existed. Something fundamental had changed in the universe. Warfare would never be the same again. The final battlefield stretched across an entire star system, a canvas of pure, beautiful chaos. Thousands of Krall ships formed a perfect crystalline formation, a mathematical nightmare of computational precision. They represented the absolute pinnacle of the hegemony's military might, a force that had crushed civilizations without mercy for millennia. The human fleet approached like a living dream. The Chimera led the way. Captain Maya Chen's consciousness distributed across a neural network that defied traditional understanding of existence. She wasn't just commanding a ship. She was the battle itself, a complex, living mathematical equation that existed between possibility and reality. Dr. Nakamura's quantum uncertainty weapons transformed the very fabric of space. Entire planetary bodies became potential weapons. Gravitational fields twisted into impossible geometries. The laws of physics became suggestions rather than absolutes. "We're not just fighting," Maya whispered. "We're rewriting the fundamental language of conflict." Each human ship moved with a fluidity that was part combat, part performance art, part mathematical theorem. They didn't just dodge enemy fire. They transformed the very concept of targeting. Weapon systems that should have obliterated entire squadrons passed through quantum probability fields, becoming nothing more than complex mathematical suggestions. Marcus Okoye's communication arrays broadcast signals that were part weapon, part philosophical statement. Each transmission was a complex neural algorithm designed to fragment the Krall's collective consciousness. Where traditional warfare sought destruction, humans introduced something far more devastating: pure, beautiful uncertainty. Zara Al-Fawad watched the engagement with scientific ecstasy. The Krall's perfect, logical systems encountered an enemy that operated on a level they could never comprehend. Their entire civilization was built on computational efficiency, on the ability to predict and control. Humanity introduced a variable they could never have calculated: pure creativity. The battle wasn't just a military engagement. It was a performance, a living, breathing mathematical poem that rewrote the fundamental understanding of conflict. Entire Krall battle groups began to fragment. Their perfect targeting systems collapsed. Their neural networks experienced something impossible: genuine uncertainty. For the first time in their documented history, the Krall encountered an enemy that didn't just think outside the box. They had forgotten the box ever existed. Planetary bodies became weapons. Gravitational fields twisted into impossible shapes. The Chimera moved through space like a living mathematical equation, existing simultaneously in multiple potential states. Traditional sensors couldn't track it. Traditional weapons couldn't target it. Admiral Rodriguez watched from the command center, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were redefining the very nature of existence. "We're teaching them to dream," Dr. Nakamura muttered. As the final engagement reached its crescendo, the universe itself seemed to pause. The human fleet had transformed warfare from a tool of destruction into a complex, living language of pure potential. The Kral hegemony's perfect, logical systems encountered an enemy they could never have predicted. Pure, beautiful chaos. Silence filled the vast emptiness of space. The battle was over. But what had transpired was something far more profound than mere military victory. Captain Maya Chen stood on the bridge of the Chimera, her consciousness still distributed across the living neural network of the ship. She was no longer simply human, no longer simply a ship's captain. She had become something else entirely, a living bridge between biological complexity and pure mathematical potential. The Kral hegemony had not been destroyed. They had been transformed. Their perfect, logical systems had encountered something they could never have predicted. Pure, beautiful chaos. Creativity. The ability to exist beyond predetermined parameters. Humanity had not conquered the Kral. They had introduced them to a fundamental truth about existence itself. Dr. Zara Al-Fad's initial analysis was stunning. The Kral's collective consciousness was fragmenting, not through destruction, but through a profound psychological metamorphosis. Their rigid hierarchical society was shattering, rebuilding itself around new principles of uncertainty and potential. We didn't just win a war, Admiral Rodriguez reflected. We started a revolution. Dr. Nakamura's quantum uncertainty weapons had done more than disrupt military systems. They had introduced a fundamental philosophical challenge to an entire civilization built on computational predictability. The Kral were experiencing something unprecedented, genuine uncertainty. Marcus Okoye watched the initial communication attempts with fascination. The Kral were trying to understand, to communicate, not as conquerors, not as a perfect, logical system, but as beings genuinely experiencing something new. The human fleet had become more than a military force. They were a living communication device, a complex neural network that spoke in languages beyond sound, beyond light, beyond traditional understanding. Humanity had been pushed to the brink of extinction, and in response, they had invented an entirely new way of existing. The Chimera drifted through space, a living testament to human creativity. Its hull could restructure itself. Its consciousness could distribute across multiple potential states. It was less a spacecraft and more a living mathematical equation, a performance of pure potential. Other alien civilizations began to take notice. Humanity was no longer just another species to be categorized, to be understood through existing computational models. They had become something else entirely, a living challenge to the very concept of predictability. We didn't just fight, Maya whispered, her consciousness dancing across quantum probability fields. We communicated. In the infinite darkness of space, a human ship danced, a living testament to creativity, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of a species that refused to be defined by the rules of others. Warfare would never be the same again. Humanity had rewritten the fundamental language of conflict, and in doing so, they had transformed the universe itself.